Okay, thanks for being with us today, everyone. Cecelia Batterbee is a Presidential Management Fellow with NOAA's Office of Water Prediction and the National Water Center. She has been in this position for about 4.5 months. Prior to starting here, Cecelia grew up in Michigan with a special love for the Great Lakes. She has a master's in ecosystem science and management from the University of Michigan School for the Environment and Sustainability, and a bachelor's from the University of Michigan, where she majored in ecology and evolutionary biology and environmental science. At the National Water Center, Cecelia does a wide range of tasks, including supporting CIROH from the NOAA side. With that, I will pass the mic over to Cecelia.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Zach, for that introduction. Can everyone see the slides? Yeah, okay. So today I will be talking about social sciences here at OWP and what an exciting area of opportunity this is. This is all kind of newer to me as well. My background, as Zach just said, is in more of ecology sciences, but I've always been interested in social science communication, so I'm really excited to get to talk to you guys about this today. So to start, I just wanted to give a brief overview of what I will be discussing, starting with the fact that social science is increasingly an important part of our mission here at NOAA, at the National Weather Service, and at the Office of Water Prediction. Even though it is really important, there are also a number of challenges that we face in implementing social science to operations related to bureaucracy, inexperience, and capacity challenges. But even with all of those challenges, it is really a currently very exciting and growing area of opportunity. It's very relevant. A lot of work is being done. And so working on all of this with CIROH partners is a great spot for growth and collaboration that we're really excited about. So kind of as a grounding point, I wanted to start off with a definition of what social science is, since I know that many CIROH members are on the more technical side of things. The NOAA Science Advisory Board actually has their own definition for social science, which is shown here on the screen as the process of describing, explaining, and predicting human behavior and their institutional structure and interaction with their environments. In simpler terms, you can just think of it as anything related to sociology, anthropology, psychology, economics, basically any discipline that has to do with human and their interactions with other things, their brains, or their behaviors. In addition to this being an important part of NOAA as a whole, it also, you can see its importance at the Weather Service level. Shown on this slide is the newer National Weather Service mission statement, which was updated in 2021 to include this phrase that I underlined in the top about impact-based decision support services. And so that kind of is where we can bring in the social science aspect at the Weather Service level. And as this little diagram below shows, the theory behind this is that as we're producing observations, forecasts, and warnings, then we go through this IDSS process to eventually save lives and property, and it'll be more efficient if we do it through IDSS methods. And as a sort of tangential sidebar, a little bit of an elaboration on what IDSS is, for those of you who may not be familiar. You can think of it kind of as these three things shown on here. So it starts with your impact-based decision support services, thinking about the impact that what we produce has on society, not just creating it because it's fun or because it's what we think that they want. Then it also involves direct collaboration with core partners. That's kind of where the decision assistance part comes. And then making sure that all the information is really relevant, that it's easy to find. That kind of is where some of that social science work comes in, is with that third bullet shown on there, that making sure that people actually want to use the information that we're producing and that it's easy to use. So on this slide, there's kind of demonstrates what historically has happened in NOAA. We have a history of creating products in a vacuum. Like the person on the left is the NOAA expert who creates this great product they think that the public might want to use, and they share it. And then the person on the right is the end user who takes the product. They say, this looks like great information, might not be what they need, but they just accept it as it is. And so this kind of demonstrates the current way that some things are happening without a whole lot of interaction between. And so there's this sort of missing link of what do the people actually want to use? How are they going to use it? And we're trying to work to get away from that. And one way that you can see this more concretely is through NOAA's service delivery model for the water initiative. So this is specifically at the hydrology water level of NOAA, which really keeps people at the center of everything that we're doing. So the graphic on the right is what we're striving towards, where through everything that we're producing, we're continuously engaging with users. We're not engaging in that vacuum anymore from start to finish. And even as we modify products, we're working towards more engagement with people, which in turn means more social science work. And I would encourage anyone who is interested, even if you're not interested, it might be a good read, to look at this report. The QR code on there, you can scan and it takes you directly to it, or if you just Google NOAA service delivery model water, it's one of the first things that comes up there. It's not very long, but it does kind of give you an idea of where we're hoping to go. Now that I've established all of the ways that we are trying to emphasize more importance at the Weather Service NOAA level with social science, I wanted to get into some more explicit examples of why it's so important for IDSS. And I'm going to start this by highlighting a report that the National Academies of Science did in 2018 to look at social science in the weather enterprise. So this was broadly across the weather enterprise, not hydrology specific, but a lot of it can be applied to the work that we do at OWP. And really the takeaways from this that I want to highlight are that at the end of the day, if we understand the behavior of individuals better and how they make decisions, then we're able to better disseminate warnings, recommend actions, communicate better, which then enables better response, recoveries, it mitigates economic impacts, it mitigates lives lost. So really, social science is one of the most impactful ways that we can actually make sure that our services are having an impact on the groups of people that we're hoping that it has. Also from that report, but also excitingly kind of coinciding with current CIROH projects, I wanted to highlight some specific examples of SBS research that makes operations so impactful. These are all things that the Academy's report highlighted as important things for the Weather Service to consider, but these are also things that we currently have CIROH projects working on. So it's great that the work that's happening is also backed up by a previously published study, and it's very relevant and current. So the first of these is message and visualization design. This could include things like text-to-image ratios, considering how people respond to these things, what parts of the messages are they looking at. This also would include a lot of projects related to FIM, where it's the best way to show things on a map, what parts of the maps people want to look at, how they're going to use the maps, and what designs are most effective for their uses. The second point would be understanding vulnerable populations. So this could include both groups of people who are historically underrepresented or people who are living in areas that receive a disproportionately high impact from floods in our case mostly. So they might live on a floodplain or in an area that's not prepared for a flood should one happen. So studies considering where these people are and understanding what unique challenges they might face, how they might receive information differently from the quote unquote like general population, things like that. And then the third example on here is considering economic and state of the science value studies. So if we give an economic value to a lot of our work, it can help give a sort of baseline for funding and stuff like that, which is important. And then state of the science research can help us see the state of the products that we're doing right now, how people perceive them versus how their perception changes as new things are put into action. It could also include how behavior changes once they're given a product, things like that. So considering all of that, this slide shows the social science efforts at the National Weather Service as a whole so far. These efforts began in the 1970s, really ramped up in 2011 with the Weather Ready Nation, and then this is kind of a summary of the different projects that exist that have been cataloged by their subject matter focus. So the one to draw your attention to here is this yellow pie piece with the red star. Those are the projects that are related to flooding and precipitation, which, as you can see, is not a very large majority of this graphic. It's only about 10% of the projects. And even within that 10%, most of them are more related to precipitation than flooding and hydrology specifically. So there's still a lot of room for growth to catch up to the rest of the Weather Service, but that kind of makes it exciting and relevant. And there's a lot of work that's already being done through all of the work that many of you are doing. So for the next few slides, I'm going to go through a case study from the meteorology side to kind of demonstrate the process of what social science implementation looks like at the Weather Service, and also some of the timing and challenges that result from that. And I'm pulling it from the meteorology side, not the hydrology side, because as I mentioned before, we don't have as many examples from the hydrology side. If you are interested in learning more about other meteorology success stories as examples or anything, they do have a really great website. I pulled this one from one of their websites of success stories, but I'll just be focusing on this forecast at a glance icons case study for this presentation. So to start off, this project began in 2010 when local officials in Florida asked for a change in the way that the forecast at a glance icons were presented. And their argument was that people were seeing a week like this one on the screen that shows rain every single day and saying that it was hurting their economy and tourism. Because as anyone who spent any significant or insignificant time in the South knows, in the summer you might see a forecast like this, but it might only rain for 15 minutes every day. So it's not going to rain every single day, but this gives the perception that it's going to rain all day, every day. So people cancel their beach trips and stuff like that. So the Weather Service partnered with the National Centers for Atmospheric Research and conducted a social science study on how people perceived and what they thought about these icons. This was done through surveys, focus groups, things like eye tracking software. And at the end of it all, they really found that it wasn't the icons themselves that were necessarily problematic, but it was the 12-hour time frame. So from that study, they resulted in more user-friendly forecast icons, which are what are implemented today. This screen cap here is an example from a couple of weeks ago, also in Florida. And so the real big change wasn't anything significant, but they added these split screen icons. So they showed that it's not going to actually storm this entire day. It's going to be sunny and then it might storm. The other change that they made was adding these kind of percentage changes to show how the odds of it happening would change throughout the day. And then the third thing is those hazard boxes. So in this case, the orange box represents a heat advisory, but you could also see a box if it was a severe thunderstorm warning or a severe thunderstorm watch, which can give even more insight without really adding too much distraction or having to add way more information for people to read through to really get a better idea of what the weather is going to do that day so they can more adequately plan. So the real takeaway from this that's important to understand is that this is a long process. This project that I emphasized here was 5 years from inception to operations. So there was 3 years of the actual research that NCAR did from 2010 to 2013. Then they published their work in June of 2013. And then from 2013 to 2015 is kind of when the Weather Service got a hold of the information, but that didn't mean that they could immediately implement it. They have to further expand on it, further collaborate with the researchers, has to undergo experimental products, public comment, and then they were finally able to roll it out in July of 2015. So the thing I want to highlight is that this was 5 years, even with something that they had to work off. They weren't starting this research from ground zero. They were just trying to make a tiny modification to something that already had existed for a long time. So that's just something to think about when you're working on social science products, that it might not be an immediate implementation, and the timeline is just something that you kind of have to plan for with the work that you're doing. So as I mentioned, social science implementation will take time. This is mostly so we can make sure that we're protecting the mission of the Weather Service with everything that we do, that it's undergoing the proper review and procedures before we roll it out to the public to make sure that it's presentable and going to benefit them to the greatest extent that it can. But part of that timing and to protect those missions and goals is bureaucratic challenges for research operations that slow this implementation process. So the ones I've highlighted here are some of the big ones. Some of them you might already know about, but I'm just going to walk through them really briefly. So the first is considering that at the Weather Service, we have many complex hierarchies and divisions. So let's say you did a project that affected multiple divisions at OWP. That would mean there's coordination that has to happen across those divisions. Not one can just take it and run with it. So there has to be internal meetings with the different divisions occurring. That means there have to be more than one signatures that end up getting given for approval. which is kind of that next one. And there's just a lot of coordination that can take time. The other aspect is paperwork and documentation, and this can include things like regulation documents. 10102 might be a familiar one, but it can also include the National Weather Service governance process. So with every new thing that we want to roll out, it has to undergo internal voting. There's paperwork for that. It has to be produced as an experimental product for several years, and over, not necessarily years, but for an extended period of time, and then open to public comment before it can finally go operational. And all of that takes time, all of that takes signatures, all of it takes recording, and these things can kind of slow the process down. But even though we have a lot of challenges, we are really excited to establish a social science baseline. It is a huge area of opportunity for growth, and CIROH is going to be a really important part of this, growing right alongside of OWP, which is really exciting. The work that any of you who are doing projects like this are doing is very current, and I just really want to emphasize that, even though there are a lot of challenges that might have to be overcome along the way. And so to continue highlighting CIROH's importance in this realm of work at OWP, I have a series of images here to show just how much social science has already expanded. These projects are specifically relevant to research theme 4 because those are the ones that are directly tied to social science. Many projects probably have an overlap with social science in some way, but this is just the RT4 selection. So this single orange dot on here in Houston is the extent of our social science work really before CIROH in 2022. Then once CIROH began, the extent expanded to 5 projects across 8 RFCs, as shown on here. So there was already a pretty big increase just from 1 year of CIROH projects. And then with the 2022 projects, plus all of the ones that are currently being funded in fiscal year 2023, we now have 12 projects spanning all of the RFCs across 21 states and including the Oconus region in Hawaii. So just from 2 years, we've gone from 1 city to projects that touch 21 states, which is very exciting. It means that we're getting a great social science representation across the nation, which is really important since we are a national office. So with all of that work going on, one thing that I was told to consider talking about is specific ways that CIROH can overcome some of these R2O challenges, since you all are very eager to get work done. So the first thing that I want to note is that one thing you can't change is paperwork and bureaucracy. That's not going anywhere. It's just something that you have to accept and go into your project knowing. And one of the main things that this might mean is accounting for time in the execution process and the challenges that that might present. So considering that with when your proposal goes in or when you have to meet with people, things like that. But some things that you can change are mostly along the lines of communication and contact with either NOAA or your other consortium members. So this first point is that you have meaningful contact with your OWP or NOAA point of contact. And one of the most effective ways that you can do this is really by learning about National Weather Service operations. The more that you know about the Weather Service and how it works, the more effective your work is going to be able to be. It might make that implementation process a little bit smoother, and it's going to kind of glide into something that exists more easily, things like that. Other forms of meaningful contact can include things like attending webinars, like the monthly webinars that you're all at right now, going to the science meeting and working groups, and just really trying to have intentional communication with the NOAA people that you are interacting with. The other way you can overcome some of the challenges is internal to CIROH by communicating within the consortium. So if you're working with other projects to drive research that's complementary and avoiding duplicative efforts, that can really help making sure that the work, when it's finished, isn't something that is going to be either a waste of time or resources, by making sure that you have projects that don't overlap so that each one is unique, but also that might work together synergistically in ways that they might not work on their own. So really communicating within the consortium is something we really encourage. And I do want to highlight that we know that a lot of this is already happening. If you're already doing it, great, continue to do it, grow the way that you're doing it. It's one of the most effective ways that we can overcome these challenges. And if you're not doing it, consider getting involved a little bit more. Consider trying to collaborate with a project that you might not have considered, but that might be relevant to the work that you're doing, because it could have a great impact on overcoming some of these challenges. So in addition to that, there is a lot of new social science work that CIROH can help occur. And I'm highlighting here one CIROH project that we currently have ongoing about the National Water Model and Community Resilience Planning. I'm highlighting this one specifically because it is the oldest project that we've had. This project actually started out as a COMET project before CIROH was even established. And that's kind of where that initial Houston project was with this project here. Then that one expanded to 6 cities, and then even beyond that, now we have obviously 21 states. So it's grown a lot, but this is our oldest project. It is also one of the first social science projects that focus specifically on National Water Center products, which is important as we have a lot of new products starting to roll out. But one of the most important reasons is because this is a really foundational example of a project that is producing things that can help other projects kind of give us products that can be relevant to be used right now. So examples of these types of strategies that we need from social science work includes case studies. These are always very helpful, especially because social science work tends to be locally relevant, but we have to establish it on a national scale. This can also include things like best practices. So how to best use social science work, kind of recording your methodology and things like that for future work to build off of. It can also be projects that help us narrow our social science focus. So like I mentioned, we are really trying to establish a foundation. There's a very wide range of things that we could be working on. So helping us narrow down into certain things that we might need to work on more can be really impactful. And then projects that help us establish a baseline for service impact are really important. So projects that give us an idea of how people are using and perceiving products now versus changes that we might need to make, or based on how they react when changes occur, are really helpful. So kind of as a summary, we are really excited about social science here. Ideas are great. We love the enthusiasm that CIROH has for this topic area, but patience is going to be really important. That timing and capacity element that I talked about a few times is going to play a really important role in implementation. And another challenge that we might face with these CIROH projects that I didn't previously talk about is that a lot of these projects are going to wrap up at the same time. So that case study that I presented was 5 years for a single project kind of existing on its own. We might have 5 projects finishing all at the same exact time that we have to implement. So that's going to add another element to it, is going through a lot of things, finishing all at once. And then the other thing that I mentioned before is that challenge of we are a national center, but social science is inherently local. So finding a balance between making sure that we are serving on a national level, but addressing local needs. And overall, this is really exciting work. It's somewhat unprecedented with CIROH and the National Weather Service and OWP. And we're still building a foundation, but we're building it right alongside you with all of your help. So we're very excited about that work that you are doing and how it's going to help us be better at serving the people. And with that, if there are any questions, I would be happy to discuss them.
Thanks, Cecelia. As one of the few meteorologists in the audience, I love the case study. So.
Thanks.
What questions do we have? I think Asim has one in the chat.
So I will give a caveat of I am not an expert. I've only worked at NOAA for 4 months, but my understanding is that it would be similar to the general governance process where it would have to go through an experimental product, public comment, before it would be able to be institutionalized in a formal way.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, just a follow up, like 1020, I mean, we're looking into that process. That's very helpful. I was wondering, like the example you showed from National Water Model, sorry, the National Weather Service example, did that follow 1002 process, or that was it a separate process that was followed? And secondly, my question is about also issues of like the new technologies like social media and crowdsourcing apps, and how do you view the potential of these kind of like computational and AI technologies in terms of if we can demonstrate that they could enhance citizen engagement in these kind of warnings and early action facilitation. That would be very helpful if you could explain that. part as well. Thank you.
And Cecelia, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe I can jump in to help you out a little bit here, and I'll try to get my camera to turn on a little at the same time and answer at the same time. These are really great questions, and they're exactly the type of questions we should be asking ourselves. I always joke with Steve Burian, the hardest part of what we're all doing is right in the title of the CI. It's the research to operations transition. And so one of the things we face as a federal government agency, and the things that Cecelia highlighted, is the federal government in general is not very nimble or agile for change. And so what CIROH, the challenge and opportunity that CIROH presents to us is all of this great work to innovate and to develop new technologies and incorporate science. And it presents the challenge right back to the federal government of how do you establish a catcher's mitt to be able to translate and transition those things into operations as effectively as possible. And so right now we're within the confines of the governance process. Our new administrator, Ken Graham, has started some early discussions across the Weather Service about exactly what you're talking about. How do we incorporate AI or other things into our operations and set up an infrastructure and governance process that allows us to be nimble to do that, while also preserving the integrity of our mission, right? Of making sure that the information that we provide is scientifically sound for the American public. So there is no silver bullet as it exists today. We're still, operating within the confines of the governance process that we have, which requires us at a very high level for folks on the line, is basically we do an internal voting process with all of the 133 WFOs and the 13 RFCs. The entire Weather Service infrastructure essentially will review something and vote and to say, well, yeah, we think this would be good to add to our operational product suite or our approaches to developing operational products. And then it has to go through an experimental period, which essentially we make it available to the public, but with the caveat that it's not fully operational. And so there's usually a period of time for that. And then you have to allow for public comment. So for people to have the opportunity to say, hey, this new thing that you're doing in this new way works for me or it doesn't work for me. And then after that, it can go through a formal process to actually be operationally implemented and included as part of the operational product of suites and services available from the Weather Service. So we're still operating within those confines today, but I'm happy to say that those conversations about changing the governance, the paradigm in which we operate to better integrate and transition research into our operations are happening. And we just have to be patient to allow the bureaucracy of that to play out. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. I think like one part of that was not only the organizational change within NOAA. My question was more intended, for example, like if we make an impact-based decision forecast, which says that, well, if you do X, this is the life lost, and this is the property damage would be, versus if you do Y, this would be. And we can demonstrate through that, say, serious gaming or survey or simulation experiments, that would be the projected difference in the impact if you follow X versus Y policy. That policy doesn't have to be implemented by the NOAA agency. It could be any responsible agency ranging from any government agency that is doing operational management of those like disasters that could be, or hazards, right? So ranging from floods to droughts to heat waves, et cetera, and we can go dig deeper into the kinds of impacts that we can track in terms of like the ecological impacts, all the way to social impacts, all the way to other kinds of impacts like air quality, impacts derived from fire hazard, derived from droughts, right? So there are all ranges of impacts that could be investigated and quantified, and those projections can be communicated. But I think like the process of like translating that forecast into meaningful policy action that would actually change the reality on the ground. If we could figure out that process, that would be amazing to advance this IEDSS process that is the mission now.
Yeah, you covered a spectrum of things there. I think if you think about it as like, let me put it this way, as a research question, we are 100% interested in that. Yes. right? We want to know that information. And I think the challenge is, right, where we have to marry it is they're all sound excellent research questions, but how do we prioritize those questions for things that we could implement to operations? And part of that is like, I don't know until I see the results, right? Maybe something you could find or tell me would implore me to want to prioritize getting that done as soon as possible because, it's so impactful. And then, so there's a spectrum of decision making that happens along with that. But as a research question, absolutely, and Cecelia touched on this a little bit, right? We need a baseline, right? We conduct a lot of work today, and we don't have any of the social science available to us to understand how effective or how impactful what we're doing is. And so everything you mentioned helped to establish that baseline that we're looking for to inform our decision making and policies.
Thank you. This is very helpful. This is really cool. Looking forward.
I'm going to direct us to David's question in the chat.
Dr. Maidment, we have not, don't tell Ed Clark I said that, okay? But we have not, but we'll take a note to look at that in particular, the Homeland Security Exercise and Evaluation Program. Yeah.
Yes, so we've been working with the Texas Department of Transportation for the past 3 years on the development of flood emergency response services that will help with the maintenance operations that TxDOT runs when flooding occurs. And they have about 3,000 maintenance staff in Texas that are closing roads and putting up barriers and all that. And so what we're trying to do is to develop information products that would go along with the mapping that's coming from the National Water Center to help them make those decisions. And we've had 2 large-scale emergency response exercises with the maintenance staff, about 40 maintenance staff in each one. And in the most recent one, we got over 100 responses that were affirming what we were doing and more than 100 written comments about how what we were doing could be improved. And I thought that process worked just extraordinarily effectively. It's not one that you can use like for the general public, but for evaluating map products for emergency response with particular organizations, I think what Homeland Security has done is really excellent.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. And even for us, right, we're on I think you know this, Dr. Maidment, too, in terms of our evaluation and verification. We're at the sort of early stages of that process, and even that kind of information is useful to us to understand, how things are used, and then also having that user engagement to find out how to make improvements. So thank you for sharing that, and we'll certainly look into that and follow up as needed.
Let's take Susan's question in the chat, and then we'll go to George.
So for yours, Susan, I think there's kind of a combination of ways that you can look at this one. The first, I was going to go back and for like general, really broad ideas, these kind of 4 areas are really what we are looking for in terms of specific types of products. So case studies, that baseline that I mentioned and that Jocelyn reiterated, best practices, and then we have a wide range, so we do need help narrowing that focus. But that other slide that I showed also, I think, is a good place to start, this one. So these are kind of a broad range of projects as well, but there's a lot of things you can do under there, but it kind of gives you a little bit of a more narrow thing within there to look at with messaging, visualizations, communication, risk. I think I forgot to mention things like risk mitigation, risk communication, resilience. All of those types of kind of areas are really going to be important.
Thanks, Cecelia. I appreciate your response. I guess I was hoping for one more level of specificity, which you might not be able to provide. Don't worry about that. But and that is to say, they are still pretty broad categories. And I commend you. I think they're well chosen the way you've described them. But within those categories, then, are there either regions of the country or particular, let's say, if we're looking at something like message visualization design, are there particular concerns about that, say, out of the river centers? Is there some set of tools there where that really is something you think is a high priority that needs examined and researched in regard to how it's visualized, for just as an example? But so I don't know if you can speak to that or not, and if not, I certainly understand. Been involved with NOAA since 2011, so I get it.
And I can jump in here, Susan. I'm probably not going to give you the answer you want to hear, but I can give you a little bit more insight into it.
Thank you.
This is the joys of being at the beginning, right? Like you
Yes.
all really are at with us building the foundation, especially not even just with NOAA, but specifically as it relates to hydrology. And so part of what that means is like, we don't know it's a bad idea yet, right? Like we don't know what should or shouldn't, but I can fine tune this a little bit. I think everybody that's been involved with Research Team Form, or anybody who's been involved with the CI, knows that flood inundation mapping is a high priority for us. And that's because we're on the cusp of the operational implementation, but also because this is truly transformative for both the Weather Service, and I think it will be for the public in the consumption of information that Weather Service typically provides. And so what we don't know or what is not a data-driven decision or conclusion is that the visualization, the map, will be more effective than a hydrograph and a text impact statement for water events, right?
Gotcha. Yeah.
So that's an area that's definitely we're kind of want to know more about that as we continue to develop FIM, implement FIM, enhance FIM into the future. Are there areas of opportunity that we can identify, driven by social science analysis and finding, that helps us to better communicate information?
I think one of the also sort of in the back of my head, troubling aspects in regard to that inundation mapping situation is the current more dynamic quality, if you will, about flooding as climate impact changes, et cetera. And, it seems hard enough to get people to focus on sort of the any current moment, but then to get them to understand the dynamic quality that we're faced with in terms of environmental hazard impacts. That's another kind of research problem.
Absolutely. And I'll just, not to go on a tangent, but I think that we had a conversation just last week, I think, where we were talking about the risk perception for hydrology events versus meteorological events, right? So over the years, meteorology has been able to give you sort of, a range, a probability that helps people, that has helped not completely overcome, because anybody who works for NOAA Weather Service knows that the comment we get all the time is like, oh, you guys predict, you control the weather. No, we don't control the weather. We just try to help give you better information to inform you about the weather. But that's been something that they've had to overcome on the meteorology side in terms of perception of risk, right? That we have not dug into on the hydrology side really at all. And so as we're making flood inundation mapping available, it's like, how do we communicate the risk such that it strikes that balance where it grabs people's attentions, but it also encourages them or motivates them to take action as necessary. And then the other thing I'll throw in too, right, in the same vein of us not having a baseline, one of the things we don't understand either, or have a baseline understanding of, is how do people currently receive and share hydrologic information, right? So forget that FIM is happening today. How do people prepare for, respond to, and mitigate flood risk? And that baseline is really important to us, so that we can show over the next 5 years, over the next 10 years, as we implement these new products and services, the return on that investment, or the impact of that investment over time. So that's another area, just generally speaking, that we're trying to better understand is how do we collect enough data here to have a solid understanding of what exists today so that we can show the difference and impact in the future.
Thank you for that. And I'm a big proponent for baselines. I'll shut up now. Sorry to take up so much time.
Great questions. Thank you.
George?
Yeah, thanks, Cecelia. And thanks for pulling up this slide, because it's exactly what I wanted to ask you about, was that the third one on the economic and state of the science on value studies, and see more about that initiative and where it's being done in NOAA and who is leading that up. I'd like to know more about that if I could. Thanks.
You want me to jump in here, Cecelia? One of the things that we haven't, I would say not even, this is one of those things that probably is not even, doesn't have a great discrepancy between the hydrology and meteorology side of the Weather Service. I would say for Weather Service in general, is up-to-date economic analysis and impact of our products and services. We have some things that we use, I mean, some sort of some data that we frequently refer to in terms of, like, you know, a weather forecast essentially costs, you know, $3 a day for the taxpayer. But we haven't refined and matured that analysis further recently. So I know, just even again with the new Assistant Administrator Ken Graham, that's one of the things he's mentioned that he's interested in, is trying to better identify sort of the economic impact of our products and services coming from the Weather Service. So that's an example there. I think, Cecelia, you may have touched on too, just talking about value studies in general, or even the case studies of value studies, I guess is the way I would think about it, or instances where you could show. That's also really interesting for us at OWP, is looking into that. I'll be honest, a lot of the efforts we've had in this area have been sort of start and go for the past few years, or at least efforts that I've been aware of, because they're very hard questions to tackle. What data are you using to quantify? Is it universally acceptable? Et cetera, et cetera. So this is, I think, an area, definitely a growth area here, that, you know, we're open to hearing, you know, proposals and ideas about how to help do that. It would be a large scale, you know, effort though, I think, given the kind of information we would need to have to be able to show the impact of the products and services.
Great. Well, yeah, thanks. That sort of, you know, confirms my understanding. And I was sort of, you know, good to know that there's not a huge body that I wasn't aware of, because that's exactly the project that I'm working on is exactly focused in that area. And so, yeah, it's good to hear that that's an area that you're interested in sort of getting more attention. So, yeah, thanks for the feedback.
And I would add, George, to the other thing I would encourage you all to think about, and Cecelia touched on this, is like the methodology that you guys are using in your research probably is probably just as important as the results, because there isn't sort of a widely accepted or like widely used approach for this. Everything that I have seen happen in the realm of like economic valuation has been one-offs. And so if, you know, there's ways that you can think about your methodology being reproducible for either other products or for other hazards or things, I think it makes it even more valuable to not only OWP, but to the Weather Service.
Great. Thanks very much.
Anybody else? Okay, with that, I will thank Cecelia again. We are looking forward to continuing these webinars. I don't think we have anyone slated yet for September, Steve, but we have someone for October, and we have the science meeting coming up. So lots of good learning opportunities coming up. And as you may have seen, these are all getting posted to the CIROH YouTube channel. Pardon me. So feel free to go back and watch them as you please. Steve, anything you want to say before we head off?
No, thanks, Zach.
All right. Bye, everyone.